Now I have the pleasure and privilege of introducing our esteemed guest, Diederik Walsak. And I'm really excited. But let me tell you a little bit about him. He was born in 1942 in a teeny village south of what now is known as Jakarta, Indonesia. And the first 3.5 years of his life were spent in Japanese POW camp. Imagine that. Imagine a little 3-year-old in a POW camp. And it was here that he was informed most of his core beliefs, which he thought were his actual character. After 50 years of self-loathing and alcohol and drug abuse, he decided there had to be a better way, which is one of those thresholds that so many of us move through after enough pain has been experienced. There has to be a better way. So he found his way to that decision, and it was time to change his mind at the deepest level through reading from universal spiritual teachings, including Master Eckhart, Rumi, and A Course in Miracles, Eckhart Tolle, and others. He developed a radical forgiveness process, which allowed him to transform the self he hated and return to the self, capital S self, whose only function is to extend love. Choose Again is his charitable society. It operates a healing center in Costa Rica, and he gives talks and teaching workshops in many places around the world. Diederik has written a book called Choose Again, The 6 Steps to Freedom, which he speaks about. He speaks about his journey and provides an in-depth teaching of his radical forgiveness process, which has helped so many around the world. And so with that, I have not had the privilege of meeting him in person, but I've had a few and fun interactions with him on the internet. And his playful nature and willingness to teach and joy are something that really attracted me. And so I'm just grateful that he is our Easter speaker. And I invite you to open your minds and your hearts and your hands and give a warm welcome to Diederik Walsak.
Thank you, Maureen. That was so kind of you, and so kind of all of you to invite me to be here on this. Really, I know there are no special days, but if we do special, then this is special. In the beginning, you asked if there's something to celebrate, and we had an unbelievable afternoon yesterday. When I was young, from the age of 10 to 20, every year, my entire family went to watch and listen to the St. Matthew Passion for Bach, which is an almost 3-hour event. And you can imagine as a 10-year-old, that's not a lot of fun. But after having been exposed to it for 10 years, it became completely ingrained. And so yesterday, I offered the insane suggestion that maybe as a community at the center, we would like to listen to it. And people took me up on it. And so we laid mattresses out on the porch, and we're lying in a tropical afternoon listening to Bach's unbelievable masterpiece. And if there ever was love, it was felt so strongly and so beautifully. And the whole message of the crucifixion and particularly the resurrection was palpable. It was an incredible afternoon. I'm not really sure where to start, Maureen, but you mentioned that the theme was kindness. And so I thought of that wonderful Hafiz poem. And I'll read that first, and then we'll talk about how to get there, if we're going to get there. It happens all the time in heaven. And someday it will begin to happen again on earth. That men and women who are married, and men who are lovers, and women who give each other light, often will get down on their knees, and while so tenderly holding their lover's hand, with tears in their eyes, will sincerely speak, saying, "My dear, how can I be more loving to you? How can I be more kind?" And when I started my journey, when I was 50, I decided that I was going to kill myself. Or there had to be a better way, as Maureen said. As it says in the Course, the tolerance for pain may be high, but sooner or later, we all get to a point where you say, something has to change. There has to be a better way. And the way I developed my program or our program, it has nothing to do with me. Let's make that absolutely clear. So when I accidentally say, your mind, just make sure that you understand that it's not about me. that it's not my program, that it's a program that came through all of us and continues to come through all of us. It's the years in the camp, and then subsequently 5 years, an additional 3 years in a war-torn zone, and then 2 years in foster care where I wasn't allowed to speak to my parents and I was sexually abused and all kinds of other wonderful things were happening. By the time I was 10, I had developed an enormously powerful level of self-hatred. And that self-hatred expressed itself in really typical ways. Anybody who's ever been addicted knows what when we're talking about. Addiction is nothing other than self-hatred finding a form. It is not a disease, it's not an illness, it's simply self-hatred finding a form. The form I chose happened to be alcohol and drugs. It was also speeding, it was also being unfaithful to my partner, it was also running my various businesses into the ground. So self-hatred has many, many different branches on the tree, but the root is self-hatred. And of course, the course will tell you the root is separation, belief in separation. And as we all know, the moment I have a belief in separation, with that comes an unspeakable level of guilt. And that's where the self-hatred kicks in again. So this continued till I was about 50. And then I was working in Whistler. Some of you know where that is. It's a ski resort north of Vancouver. And I had to drive back to Vancouver 2 or 3 times a week. And there was one spot along the Sea to Sky Highway where there was a 20-foot gap in the barrier. And so at one point I stopped my car and parked next to it and looked down, and it went down at least 1,000 feet. And I thought, well, that little trip down there won't be a wheelchair waiting when I hit the bottom. So that was going to be my perfect exit. It wouldn't hurt anybody else. And I had a very old car, so that didn't matter either. And this package then would change form. And I was very close to doing it. And then I got to the point suddenly where I heard myself literally say there has to be a better way. Interesting enough, of course, that's verbatim from the course. Somebody had given me A Course in Miracles 2 years earlier, and I'd opened it randomly, as people tend to do, and I saw sin is lack of light, as darkness is lack of love. And I thought, wow, that's what I've always looked for. That's what I've always known to be true. This book is incredible. This is what I'm going to do. The next line had the Father and the Holy Spirit and the Son of God, and I said, not so much. I was fairly allergic to the word God. I was very allergic to religion. And this immediately, to me, smacked of religion. And I said, well, I'll do it my own way. But 2 years later, when I got to the point where either suicide was the solution or another solution, I opened the course again. And this time I didn't see any of the offender language. Where it said God, I saw love. Where it said Son of God, I saw myself. Where it saw Holy Spirit, I saw my capital S self. In other words, it spoke immediately and directly to me. And I thought, I'm going to do this. Some of you who may have read my book, you know that I was an international athlete for many years and completely uncoachable. I was instrumental in having several coaches fired from national teams. And I had a very powerful philosophy that I can take care of myself. Thank you very much. And God, you look after the others, I will be okay. And then I found out I couldn't, and I wasn't okay, and I couldn't do it. And for the first time in my life, I said, okay, I'm going to surrender to a coach. Maybe there is a coach that knows more than I do. I didn't believe it, but I thought if there's a chance, I'm going to give that coach a shot. And that coach asked me for 365 days of commitment. And I can do the math, that's a year. So I said, okay, I'm going to do a year. And if after a year, my life is not dramatically improved, I can still go after highway. And if they put a barrier there, I'll find another way. But after 2 or 3 days, my life was changed, irrevocably changed. And one of the things that got me from the course more than almost anything else was that brilliant teaching from lesson 93, which is a breathtaking lesson, and we read it 2 or 3 times a week here at the center. But it taught me that whatever evil I thought I had done or had been done to me was never done. Now, that doesn't mean in a literal sense, because that is severe level confusion, but it does mean in the interpretive sense. So whatever had been done in the war, in the camps, and all the horror I'd seen, at one point I saw a woman being whipped with barbed wire, naked, so you can imagine that nothing was left of her by the time it was finished. And there was a group of 5 or 6 little boys like me who watched it completely without any emotion. That's how badgered we had already been, how already become. In a few days, I recognized that my life has changed because who I was, and that's what the course gave me right in the beginning, who I was unchangeable. And who I was actually just love. And those 2 statements really not only took me by surprise, but overtook me completely. And I thought, if this is true, then even I can have a decent life, that even I can pull out of this. And then I started doing my work and everything started shifting really rapidly. And there came a moment, maybe 10 days into, I was doing it 12 hours a day. I mean, I was doing the course 12 hours a day, every day. It took a year, so I'm going to do it for a year. Live or die. Anyway, and then came a point about a week or 10 days into it, I had an enormous wave of anxiety. And I thought, what if none of this is true? What if this whole fat 1,400-page book written on ridiculously thin paper is just all bullshit? And then I thought, I don't care. I feel fantastic. I don't care. And then, of course, another thought came in and said, what if you're the only one that actually believes this is true? What if you're the only one that actually lives this work? And again, I don't give a shit. I feel better than I ever thought possible. And that kept me on the path. And then strangely enough, within a few weeks, somebody noticed the difference in me, said, can I come and talk to you? I said, wonderful, come and talk. I don't know what about, but by all means come. And they came, we had a wonderful conversation. And then 2 or 3 more people came. And then eventually it turned out that I was having what very much looked like a therapeutic practice, even though I had never even entertained that idea as a possibility. And that continued for a while, and I was doing it absolutely free. And then somebody said, can I give you some money? And I said, wonderful, feel free, go ahead. And then in order to finally establish a professional rate, I had a couple also in the first 5 months that came to see me, and they were thoroughly miserable. The husband, they had been separated, and the woman accused her husband of having to go and see a hooker. And he denied it. And it was obvious to me immediately that it was true, but he denied it. And at the end of the session, he said, what do you owe you? I said, whatever you feel like paying. It's by donation. He said, I hate that shit. Why don't you tell me what it is? And I said, no, it's by donation. Second session, same story, denied it again. Third session, he finally said, yes, but we were separated and it was only a blowjob. And so that was a revelation for the couple. They were very happy about that little bit of news. But at the end, he said, well, it's now 3 sessions. What do I owe you? And I said, it's by donation, but I don't work for less than a hooker. And so I got paid really, really a lot of money for the first time in my life. A week later, I happened to have a prostitute for a client. I told her the same story. And she said, go fuck yourself. I'm not going to pay you that much. So my pay scale was established by the practical world. In that first year, we developed, when I say we, it's with a group of people I was working at that time with, exclusively with addiction. And I had one group of, I think they're called Native Americans in your country. And I had an unfortunate habit of saying to them, why don't you just process it? And one of them finally spoke up and said, Diederik, what do you mean by why don't you just process it? So I said, that's a really good question because I'm not sure. Let's just go from scratch. And so I went to a blackboard and I said, step 1 is I'm upset. The key to step 1 being upset and not the horrible word because following it is to simply demonstrate the teaching that I'm never upset for the reason I think. Our temptation as wonderful little egos, intellectual egos, is to say I'm upset and then I'll give you all the reasons why, and then you agree with me and we're all on the same camp and we're both made it real and we're both in jail. So the first step is absolutely essential that I only say I'm upset. Step 2 is even more difficult, and that's about me. It has nothing to do with anyone else. It has nothing to do with what my father did to me, what the Japanese may or may not have done, whatever story I could come up with, it had nothing to do with any of that. And as you can imagine, step 2 is resisted universally. It's an incredibly tough step. People don't like taking it, but once they take it, they're on their way to absolute freedom, because then you go to the next step, and that is, what am I actually feeling? And because I had no feelings other than rage and numb, when I started doing my work, I made up a feeling list that has some 64 feelings or so on it. And sorry, I have a wonderful frog in my throat.
It's okay. It happens all the time.
Yep. So I made up this feeling sheet, that I used it in the beginning to learn to feel, because I had no feelings. I was chronically angry, I was chronically furious, I was chronically in a rage, or I was deeply suicidally depressed, and there was no nuance in between. In my experience, people that know me in those days would argue, saying, well, that's not true, that's not how we saw you. But as we all know, that doesn't matter. What matters is, how do I see me? And I saw myself as absolutely disgusting, revolting, totally unworthy of love, totally unworthy of anything to do with human comfort. Basically, the Antichrist. And the term Antichrist was given to me by my first mother-in-law, and I wore it proudly like a badge, because I thought, yes, that's what I am. I am the Antichrist. What is the Antichrist? The Antichrist is anyone who denies the truth within. And that means that we probably have some 5 or 6 billion Antichrists on our planet, because to know the truth within is an extraordinary path. There aren't many paths that I've come across that lead there, whose sole intention is to actually return to the truth within. There's a funny little joke about my mother-in-law and the Antichrist. When my wife gave birth to our first child, my mother-in-law flew out. She lived in Bermuda, and she flew out to Vancouver and drove to the hospital. And she said, "Oh, it's incredible. I found a parking spot right in front of the hospital. Jesus found it for me." And my wife said, "Well, that's funny. Diederik finds a parking spot wherever he goes. Satan finds it for him," she said. So that was our relationship. But it was absolutely true. I was the Antichrist. And then there came a workshop, or we'll continue. So step 3 is the feeling. The feeling is so important. And why is the feeling important? Not because in itself it's important. In itself is completely and totally irrelevant. But it has a function. And the function is, as it says in the course, I choose the feelings I experience. I choose the feelings I experience. Not you make me feel, that makes me feel, as we normally speak. You make me so happy. No, you don't. I make myself happy. I am happy, and I see it reflected in you, or the reverse. So I had to learn to feel and to learn to use the feeling. And how do we use the feeling in our process? By staying in the feeling and not in the intellect, and to allow the feeling to walk me back to a memory. And often people say, "Oh, I don't have any memories before the age of 12, the age of 15, or whatever it is." And that may be true. But my experience over the last 30 years is that over time, those memories go back further and further and further, even to in utero. Now, having walked that feeling back, now suddenly I remember an instant. So the first time I applied the process to myself. There was a horrible sort of powerless rage that I felt. And I said, well, since I came up with this nonsense, why don't I see if it actually works? So I said, okay, let me take that feeling and allow the feeling to walk me back. And it took me directly back. It was right after the war. For the 3.5 years, of almost 4 years in camps, I hadn't met my father because he was in man's camps. He survived. And my brother and my mother survived as well, which is remarkable because over 35% people, People in the camps in Japan, in Java, didn't survive. But I met my father for the first time, and it was a very strange encounter. He was not a warm, loving man. He had suffered physically enormously in the war. He and I are roughly the same size. I weigh about 200 pounds. He weighed under 100 pounds when he came out of the camp. So he was in bad shape, and his self-hatred, which was well developed before the war, but his self-hatred took the same forms it did in me, and being violent and being aggressive and being nasty and being a drunk, all of those things. After the war, as a small family, my brother, my mom and dad, were walking across a fish pond just outside of Jakarta. And the only toy I had ever owned, which was a little red truck, fell out of my hands into the water. And the water was just, couldn't it be more than 2 or 3 feet deep? And my father refused to get it for me. And that powerless rage that I felt so often had its genesis at that moment. And what did the feeling tell me? What did the feeling tell me about me? What was the message? The message was, you're not supported and nobody loves you. You'll never be loved. I believed it. I believed it. And here comes the horrible truth. Any core belief that I don't transform or relinquish will run the show. We have no free will. Any belief, any core belief that I have not transformed will demand evidence. And as long as it demands evidence, guess what? I'll find the evidence. So even if people are supporting me, I will sabotage it because it goes against my belief. And so over the years, I've done some remarkable sabotaging of amazing opportunities because I didn't deserve to be supported. I wouldn't welcome support. Probably the most dramatic was I lived in Spain in 1969 for 3 months, and I met Salvador Dali and spent quite a bit of time with him. And at one point, he invited me to be an architect on a castle that he wanted to build. What does my self-sabotaging little ego says? No, thank you. I don't work for people. So there goes that wonderful opportunity, which would have changed my life entirely. But I'm really glad I said no, because if I hadn't said no, I wouldn't be sitting here with you. And I wouldn't have the incredible life I now have. So in step 4, you discover what you made up. What's the core beliefs you made up? In my case, let's say unworthiness, don't deserve to be supported. Step 5, you begin to do the forgiveness. And the forgiveness, as you, as really good little course students all know, is never, ever, ever, ever for anything outside of you. It's always for the self. So forgive me for believing that I'm not supported. And then the loving self, which responds to that question, to that statement, responds lovingly. It says, thank God that's true. You've always been supported. You're divinely supported. And as my process started working on me, and I started becoming unreasonably happy, increasingly unreasonably happy, increasingly people started coming to see me till at the end of the year. No, let me just finish the process itself. So that's where you do the correction of the core belief. And then step 6 is where you do an affirmation of who you truly are. So step 6 is forgive me for forgetting that I am unchangeably innocent. Forgive me for forgetting that I am loved. Forgive me for forgetting that I've never been hurt. Or any other forgiveness that comes up for each individual. And the response to that again comes from the loving self. And it says, thank God, that is the truth. You are loved. I'm glad you remembered. Or thank God, that is the truth. You have never been hurt. Your body, yes. Your body's been hurt. But who you are has never, ever been affected. And with that last forgiveness, when people do it in the circle for the first time, and I ask them to do it with their eyes closed, their faces drop 20 years. It's incredible because it really does go in, provided you follow the feeling. If you ask the ego to join on this journey, as you all know, it will be sabotaged. It will take you somewhere else. It will not allow you to go to the source, to the absolute genesis where you all made it all up. And that moment that you remember may over time become earlier and earlier and earlier to where you even receive messages in utero. I heard people that would come to our center or to a workshop say, well, my feeling goes back to in utero. And I always thought, well, that's very nice, but I think that's a little woo-woo. I'm not going to go along with that directly. But then I found, my God, I had an experience where it went directly back to in utero. And that, of course, is not verbatim. That's not literal. That's purely an energetic experience, which is now interpreted. And that's basically the 6-step process. Are there any questions at this point from any of you? I would like to make this as interactive as possible.
All right. So yeah, now we have a few questions coming up. First of all, thank you so much for your incredible reframing of, the crucifixion, basically. Like, you seriously went through it, and as many people go through their own personal crucifixions, but to get to a recipe that helps people to reframe it is like literally walking people to the bridge of liberation and of freedom. So I so appreciate that. It looks like Richard has something to share, and then Bella Gordon. So Richard, possible?
That was incredible. Thank you very much for your share, Diederik. That was really, I must say that I've been through part of that, self-loathing. And I like the expression about that self-hatred will find form. It doesn't matter whether it was alcohol, drugs, gambling, whatever. It's just an indicator. It's not the alcohol, but the alcohol is symptomatic of something else.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the way that you distilled it down to it's all about a belief in separation. And any core belief that I have not transformed demands evidence. Now, can you explain how, because I have some core beliefs that I've shared in groups around money,
Mm-hmm.
Which is self-worth, which is not good enough, which is I don't deserve.
Right.
So can you through using that example, can you demonstrate how one would rewire a core belief? Or is that not possible to do here?
No, that's absolutely not only possible, but that's about all we do. That's our work, is to rewire core beliefs. The money thing is funny because I lost all my money in '96, and I've never made it back. I don't have a bank account. I don't own a property. Strangely enough, I have a car in my name. I don't know how that happened because I sure as hell didn't buy it. Money to me has been a barrier to love originally, and now that's completely transformed in where I have everything I need. The word money or the thought of money doesn't come up in my mind anymore, because I recognized quite a while ago that money is just another word for love. It takes a function. It can have that function, but also take the form of self-hatred. And fortunately, I've known so many people, including my mother's family, who were enormously wealthy, like ridiculously wealthy. And so when we came back from the concentration camp and traveled to Holland, where we sort of joined my mother's family, the contrast between the 3.5 years that I had experienced, where we had absolutely nothing, no food, no water, blah, blah, you name it, normal concentration camp story, and the opulence and the wealth that I landed in when I returned to Holland, the contrast was so huge, and I immediately made up, this is not for me, this is not me. In other words, I gave it a meaning, and the meaning that I gave it was that if you give me a lot of money, it means you must love me. And because I'm not lovable, that's not going to happen. So I made sure that I never made money. And every time I had a business, and I had a restaurant in Vancouver for 13 years, I ran a hotel in Whistler for 2.5 years, both ended up in Gourmet magazine. They're really good places. And I sabotaged the money. So in other words, if I don't transform that belief, it will continue. with that belief, I opened a center 17 years ago when I was 63. We had some donations, but not anywhere near enough. So we did it on a shoestring. And there were times that we couldn't afford to buy food and we had to go a couple of days without food. It's always been incredibly tough until maybe the last 5, 6 years, when suddenly people are coming forward and people say, my God, you're doing amazing work. We had a gentleman last year who came to see us and he said, incredible program, absolutely amazing. What's lacking is nutrition. I'm going to donate enough money to build a greenhouse and to set up a microgreen production system to add to the program. And then he gave us another enormous amount of money for additional issues. But money now just comes. I never think about it. It doesn't enter my mind anymore. I can tell you what happened in '96 when I lost every penny I had, including 4,000 dollars that I didn't have, but I lost those too. I came home from Costa Rica and I sat in my living room and I said, well, I can't pay the rent. And if I can't pay the rent, my wife will leave me. And the anxiety started building in my belly. And I said, okay, I'm going to make that as big as I can make it. So I made it to, it was like hot tar. And then I began to laugh because I couldn't make it any bigger and nothing had happened yet. And then I thought, okay, my wife will leave, I'll give up the apartment, and then what? Then I'll go downtown. What am I do downtown? I can become a drug dealer. I'd be very good at that because I know a lot about drugs and I can talk. Or I can become a panhandler, which isn't the most noble of professions I could imagine, but I'd be good at that too. Or I just go to a shelter and say, I'm a therapist, give me a bed and a bowl of soup, and nothing happened. And from that moment on, from '96 on, I've never had a moment of financial anxiety. I've never had a moment of wanting money either. It hasn't been an issue for me. It hasn't come up. So it's an example of where a core belief can absolutely be transformed. That core belief, by the way, comes from scarcity. And the Course talks about that so beautifully. It says, it's the belief that there's a state somehow different from the one you're in that you would be better off in.
Yes.
It's a belief that there's a state somehow different from the one you're in that you would be better off in. And once I recognized and integrated that that couldn't be true, all those issues fell away. And all the things my ego said I didn't have and should actually have became less and less important, became completely meaningless. Does that answer your question, Rich?
Yeah, very, very much. Thank you. And also, if it's possible to post the 6 steps somewhere or provide a link to it. I couldn't write that fast.
Yeah, he has a book that we'll be promoting, and we can
Okay.
go list those steps as well.
All right, cool. Thanks.
Diederik, it's interesting because recently I was reading this book by the director, Sarah Polley, who did Women Talking, if you haven't seen that film yet. And her book is called Run Towards Danger, which means like to go into that pain, to go all the way into it. And the process that you're sharing is that it's the difference between letting the pain or the fear have you or allowing yourself to experience the insanity of your own fear and pain. And I actually, I tried that out with migraines when I was suffering from migraines. And instead of deciding there was someplace better to be or trying to kill it off, I just sat through it. I just experienced it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never had a migraine since. And it was several years ago.
Yeah, beautiful.
It's kind of like you're saying, like, make friends with your madness. It won't have you.
Right. And
Yeah.
with pain, I'm glad you brought that up because I have an oldest technique that many years ago I suffered from stenosis. I don't know if you know what stenosis is, but it's a narrowing of a channel that the nerve runs through, and therefore it pinches on the nerve. And it was in the circle at the center, and it was unbearably painful. So I left the circle and went to my room, laid on my bed, and I couldn't lie down. So I went and sat in the porch in a rocking chair, and then I heard myself say, "Who's the I that's in pain?" And the pain completely vanished. Of course, a few seconds later, it came back because I'm not enlightened. But the key to understanding so-called suffering is that it's a mistaken interpretation based on an identity I've made up. It's my identity that chooses the suffering. My true identity doesn't even know what suffering is.
It's
So
really,
if I, sorry,
Go ahead, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's really hard for the ego to hear that because it requires taking 100% responsibility for your experience.
Yeah, exactly. The ego will never say that. And that's why we work with the three parts of the mind. So the loving self, call it the Holy Spirit, call it whatever you want to call it. I just call it the capital S self. And then there's the small s self, which is the ego. And what is the ego? Nothing other than a construct of beliefs. Foundational, the belief that I'm separate, but from there, that's the root of the tree, and then the branches are the tree. I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I don't belong, I'm not lovable, you name it. We all have a similar tree to play with. So in our work, what I do, we don't really approach the belief in separation, because to me, that's the final step of the process. We do work with the branches. And as the branches are being lopped off, we get closer and closer and closer to the actual final step, which is we're one. There's no separation between us in truth.
Yeah, I have a lot more questions, but I'm going to pass it over to Bella Gordon. And
Okay.
then, since they did wear such fine headgear today.
I love it. First of all, thank you so much, Diederik. Just such a beautiful and moving share today. And when you took us through the process and you got to the point of, I forgive myself, and all the statements that you said, I was moved to tears.
Mhm.
It was just so beautiful, the remembering that takes
Right.
place of the truth. And I had the same question that Richard asked when he, would you go over the steps, just one phrase of each, like each step?
Why don't we do it this way, Beth?
Okay.
Tell me something you've been upset about in the last 24 hours. Just a tiny upset. It doesn't have to be my cat died or my mother got run over by a truck. No, something small.
Okay. Something small is just something I said I would do that I realize I'm not doing.
Okay, so the first step is, and that's why it's so difficult. I was upset. That's the first step. And note how Bella is. Do you call Bella Beth, or what do you call yourself?
I do call myself Bella. I call myself, and I call myself Bella Beth. So
Okay.
for your pleasure.
So notice that you immediately got in why you're upset. And that is so incredibly typical of the ego, because it wants to explain.
Yeah.
It wants to get a justification. I spoke, I said something I shouldn't have said, and that's why I'm upset. And then the Course comes in and gives you a loving little reminder. You're never upset for the reason you think.
Right.
So train your mind to leave the word because out. I was upset. Step 2, it was entirely about you. Are you willing to take that step?
Say it again. I was.
Step 2, it is entirely about you, not about anything or anyone else.
Yes, I am willing to take that step.
Fantastic. So that's lesson 70. Okay. And then you go to the third step, and that's the feeling. So close your eyes for a moment and go back to that upsetting moment. And all of you who had an upset, you can play along. Go back to the upsetting moment and check in. What did you feel at that point?
I felt kind of a combination of sad and angry.
Okay. And if you had to make a choice, which you're going to have to, because we don't have all day, you choose one. Which would you choose?
Sad.
Sad. So you felt sad. Is that a familiar feeling?
Yes.
So keep your eyes closed. So it's a familiar feeling. You feel sad quite often. And how big was that feeling of sadness when it happened? Was it on a scale of 1 to 10?
Today, or in the last 24
No, when it happened, when you experienced the upset.
I would say maybe a 5.
Okay, so stay in that feeling, stay in the sadness, And now give yourself permission to walk that sadness back to when you were a little girl. And something happened. Somebody said something, did something, or didn't say, do something. And you had that same feeling of sadness. And tell us what's happening and how old are you?
I'm 4.
Stay in it.
And my parents' marriage was in trouble. And my dad was going in and out. And I woke up one morning and he was sitting in our bedroom. My sister and I shared a room. He was sitting in our bedroom and I thought he had left. And I crawled in his lap and I said, I thought you left, Daddy. And he said, I just couldn't live without my girls.
Mm.
And then he left.
And then he left without his girls. And at that moment, you gave yourself a message about you. And what was that? What did it say about you that he left without you?
I'm hearing 2 phrases, not good enough and not lovable.
Not lovable, okay. So let's do the not lovable. So go ahead, so the forgiveness, then forgive me. And this process is designed to be done alone, because the last thing I want to do is continue a codependency on a therapist or someone else to work with. Because I recognize that in the long run doesn't work. So this process really allows you to become your own therapist. So forgive me for believing I'm not loved. Can you say that?
Yeah. Forgive me for believing I'm not lovable.
That is an absolute impossibility. Love is your essence. You can't be what you're not. You are love. And that's unchangeable.
Yes.
So no matter what your dad did or your mom did or how they felt or what happened yesterday, who you are was never touched. You are love. And then to the last, forgive me for forgetting that I'm loved.
Forgive me for forgetting that I am loved, that I am lovable, that I'm good enough,
Right.
that anything ever happened.
Thank God that is all true.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you remembered. You are loved, you're unchangeable, and nothing ever, ever goes wrong. Now close your eyes and go back to your dad is sitting, he's in your bedroom, and you crawl in his lap and you said, Daddy, I thought you left, and then he leaves. How do you feel?
It's more neutral.
More neutral. Now go back to what happened yesterday, the little upset that you had. How does that feel now?
I'm not upset.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's beautiful.
So everybody here, of course, recognizes that a core belief is what I call my personality and my character. That isn't going to change in 1 or 2 corrections because I've told myself the same bullshit for 80 years. I'm not going to change that in 1 session, nor are you. But you're now well on your way. Remember where the Course says your task is not to seek for love, but to find the barriers. Every core belief is the barrier. If you're ever wondering what they were talking about in the Course, that's what they're talking about. It's the identity you make up. The entire identity is a barrier to love. We often use a beautiful little poem by a Japanese poet called Bunan, and I think he's from the 15th century, but he says, first die and be absolutely dead. And then come back and do whatever you want. It will all be good. What does that mean? Drop your personality, drop your identity. None of it means anything. None of it. And then once you scraped the slate, you guys don't know what a slate is, but I grew up with slates in high-end school. You clean the slate, you have an empty, clean slate, and then you come back. And then you can choose some beliefs that work for you. You know their beliefs, you know you don't need them, but they work for you in the illusion. It's very important to me that we never slip for level confusion. So level confusion would be, well, no, I can go around without an identity. You won't function on the planet. You'll be gone, which is fine. Nothing wrong with that, but you can't work here. So you do need some identity. You do need some core beliefs. But now we're going to choose them consciously coming from love.
Mhm.
And now we have a whole different experience. Everything starts shifting. I wanted to finish the three parts of the mind. So there's the capital S self, small s self, and in the middle is what we call the decision maker. The ego and the Holy Spirit never communicate. You know that, the Course tells you that frequently in many different places. So how is this going to come about? By the decision maker. And the decision maker is out to lunch, immature, hasn't grown up in 99% of us. It's actually an entity you've never talked about. But that entity we're going to have to raise to adulthood, where it actually can say, oh yeah, I know what my ego has to say. It always sits on their shoulder. It tells me the same bullshit day after day after day. I'm going to ask my loving self. And that is an important process. And then the loving self says, oh, hey, you made it up. It's not true. So the decision maker is essential to this process. One part in the Course where that is dealt with beautifully is paragraph 12 in paragraph 5 in lesson 12, where it talks about the meaningless world. And then it says, and not verbatim, but close, what is meaningless is neither good nor bad. Why then should a meaningless world upset you? But because the world is meaningless, you have given it all the meaning it has for you, and that is what meaningless in truth. If you could step back and ask your loving self to write the meaning upon it for you, it would make you indescribably happy. What a fantastic combination of words, indescribably happy. That's what happens when I hand it over. So then I hand it over to the loving self, and now I get the true meaning, the loving meaning. What was that for? Which is the key question that the Course teaches. What was that for? Underneath my words is written the word of God. My words are meaningless in truth. And when I step back and erase those and allow the message that the Holy Spirit, the loving self, God, whatever you want to call it, gives me all day long, then I see the meaning. But it's a completely different meaning than I thought it had. Does that make sense? So it's essential that I learn to raise the decision maker to adulthood. He or she has to become the adult in the room. Otherwise, it's the ego. As you know, the Holy Spirit doesn't debate. It doesn't say, ego, there you go again. There's another way of doing it. It doesn't. The Holy Spirit is just nothing other than a wonderful GPS. It asks you to make a right turn. If you don't make the right turn, it doesn't say, well, now you're on your own. It says, next opportunity, turn right. And it's always loving, but it doesn't argue. It doesn't debate. And so I need an arbiter, and the arbiter is the decision maker. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, thank you. Next question.
Hi, Diederik. I'm Brenda.
Hi, Brenda.
I more wanted just to acknowledge and add testimony to the work that you teach us, and also to acknowledge how profound it is that you're with us today on Easter and the day of resurrection, and how we all get this opportunity to resurrect today by choosing again. It's mad.
Mm.
And
So-
just like he didn't plan his healing sanctuary, we didn't plan this. I was like, oh, when are you going to come? He's like, this time. I'm like, great. I wrote it in the calendar. I didn't even realize it was Easter. And then I was like, Easter, it's so good to go with the plan and not, so yeah, great. Anyway, I'll pass.
Oh, that's perfect. So, but yeah, just again to add acknowledgement and testimony to your work. You know, I found you by mistake. I was doing some Course in Miracles course, and the last assignment, the final assignment was now read chapter 31 in the text. And I'm like, well, I got to go to work. Who can read this to me? And I found you by looking up Choose Again. And I am so grateful that I did, because you know, I then I did this deep dive on Diederik. I watched your 2015 speak from New York, where you were a guest. Oh my gosh, I was just like so happy and clapping by the end of that. And then my son, you know, what kind of was my conduit to do all this work, you know, struggling with my son. And you said on some of your videos how you just reframe, like using, you know, what follow with I am, what you follow I am with, like, or what I have, like, I have bipolar, or I have addiction. And you just like strip that down. You're like, you don't have this. This is not what, you know, who you are. And that just really made a big difference, not only for how I could see myself, but how I could see my son and everyone else I meet. And I was led to also, then you were doing online circles. I had these really high hopes of coming to Costa Rica to see you. And then of course, everything was shut down and with COVID, and I got to do a circle with Andrew, and all of a sudden, Beth, I can relate. All of a sudden, I'm 2 years old. I'm crying. I'm struggling to eat with my left hand, or I'm to eat with my right hand because I'm naturally left-handed, and my dad's forcing me to eat with my left hand. And all these things are coming up of my unworthiness, like I don't belong here. And she just, through your tools, really got me to see the truth and forgive myself. And it's just been so life-changing for me, your work. And again, I'm so happy that you're here, and all my friends here get to be exposed to you in this way. So and I didn't make it to Costa Rica, but I felt like I couldn't. I've been there, and so I did in January get to go to Costa Rica, and what a beautiful country you get to live in.
We'll just wait for you, Brenda. We'll be here. I want to touch in on the crucifixion, because the teaching, the original teaching of the crucifixion, the way I see it, is that this man was on the cross. And what did he say? He said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." And the way that's been interpreted is that they're killing the Son of God. They're going to feel like shit for 2,000 years. All the religion deals with the guilt and the shame that comes from that. And of course, the Jewish people have been held responsible for that whole event. But that's not what he meant. He didn't give the world permission to unleash a guilt frenzy. He gave the world permission to recognize that they know not what they do. They think they're hurting me. They think they're killing me. But I can't be hurt. And the Course deals with that beautifully in an incredible little passage. It says, "Teach him that whatever he may try to do to you, your perfect freedom from the belief that you can be harmed shows him that he's guiltless." Now, if that isn't the crucifixion message, then I don't know what is. Show them, teach them that whatever they may do to you, they can put a spear in my side. They can give me vinegar in my mouth. They can do whatever they want. Teach them that whatever they may try to do to me, my perfect freedom from the belief that I can be harmed shows all of them that they're guiltless. That was the message. But because we're all completely addicted to guilt and completely addicted to the idea of victim, we rewrote the script. A few hundred years later, we turned it into a massive guilt trip. It never was intended for that. And of course, we all know the moment you start messing with somebody's identity as a victim, you're in trouble. We have 7 billion victims on the planet, and that victimhood is defended at all costs. Forgive me for believing I'm a victim. I'm not a victim. Jesus was not a victim. He chose. Everything that seemed to happen to him, he asked for and received as he asked. What does that mean? He wanted to demonstrate the truth of who I am. The truth is that I am a spirit. The truth is that I am love. And as Meister Eckhart, who is one of my favorite thinkers, teachers, beings from the 1300s, at one point he says, the Bible says that God loved the world so much he gave it his only begotten son. And Meister Eckhart said that that's actually not what it means. It doesn't mean he gave his only begotten son to the world. He gave it to the world within. And so the resurrection is within. I'm not going to go walk outside and hope to catch a glimpse of that man. I'm going to look in the mirror and make eye contact with the self and catch a glimpse of that man. That's the resurrection. It has nothing to do with all the stuff that we think it has to do with, least of all Easter eggs. But that's another story.
Oh, don't take our Easter eggs.
I know I won't. I won't take it away from you. You can have it.
Carly has a question.
Yeah. Carly.
I just wanted to thank you, Diederik, for your heart. And Maureen, thank you for this meeting. And thank you for just the last little part on what that the resurrection is within, and that the crucifixion means that we could never hurt him. Because what it really gives me is this complete love of Christ and the crucifixion. And I can be around my family who still believe the other way. But because I'm happy and because I have your hearts with me, you know, I'm in a new place. So just thank you so much for this Easter Sunday with the true resurrection. And Maureen, last week you just said, we do bunnies, the Bible, and the Bhagavad Gita. And I'm back again. That's
Nothing we don't do.
eclectic mix on SpeakEasy.
Yes.
So,
When it comes to spirituality, we're like Diederik's second client, who's a whore.
Well,
So
she was a woman who kept herself standing horizontally.
I like the idea of this whole thing, you know, you can be innocent so I can be free. You know, you can be innocent so I can be free. And as long as I want to withhold your innocence from you, I got to be the jail keeper. And that is not a job I want. That is not what I came here for. I didn't come to keep watch over your report card of, you know, who you think you are. I'm not here to play that game. If your script is tantalizing, and even if I get to play, you know, like the villain or whatever, yeah. So when you say with Bella and you bring in that new idea, you know, that new affirmation, you were saying like core beliefs from your loving self. What are some core beliefs from your loving self that you now attempt to thread through your consciousness?
I'm kind.
Oh.
I'm gentle. I'm generous. Yeah, just character traits which have nothing to do with absolute love, but which are the offspring of absolute love. But absolute love is not a feeling; it's a state of being. But from that absolute love, I act, and the acts will have an emotional aspect to it. And it's not that you mentioned, Maureen, a couple of weeks ago that the theme was going to be kindness, or ideally in your mind, it's going to be kindness. And kindness is the result. It's not what I set out to be. Because God knows I wasn't kind. I had no idea what kind was. I was a genuine asshole, no question about it. And the idea of kindness, that means weakness. So that wasn't going to happen. But as I remove my self-hatred, the space that's taken up by those core beliefs now becomes less and less. And what happens with space when it's less occupied, love flows in. As the Course will teach you that really beautifully. If there's no room for love to flow in, there's no room for love to flow in. I have to make room. And the
Yeah.
room that I have to make is made through the transformation of beliefs.
Got it.
And this is an ongoing process. I've done it for 30 years now, and I've still got core beliefs that come up. And last year discovered one that I wasn't even aware of. And it was an unbelievable rage. And I literally had not been in rage in 30 years. And there it was, an old-fashioned, complete ego rage. And I immediately knew where it came from. It was purely survival, purely back to the camp, 2 years old, starving and having to survive somehow. And that survival was interfered with at the center in my ego mind. So I want to make clear that any suffering any of us do is nothing other than a misinterpretation of an event. We're doing a lot of trauma work. We're teaching workshops on trauma. We're helping people incredibly move through trauma that they've been sitting in for 30 years. And once they're here, the trauma is nothing other than my misinterpretation of something that happened.
Mm.
We don't deny it happened. And the second aspect to that healing actually being effective is to recognize it happened to the body, but I'm not a body. You may not be surprised that we get probably 70 to 80% of the women that come here have been sexually abused. My guess is that's actually not too far off from the general population, except nobody talks about it. But once they come here and they hear not the new age nonsense, but it didn't happen, nothing happens, everything has always been for you. That's not what you need to hear when you're in the middle of trauma. But what they do hear is that, yes, it did happen. And it happened to the body. And here comes a new theory for you, a new idea. What if it were true that you were not the body? Where would your suffering be then? And then their face changes completely. Well, then there's no suffering. Exactly. All suffering comes from body identification. And again, that is the message of the crucifixion. You can imagine in the body, what that man went through on the cross is unspeakable, unbelievable the pain he must have had. Forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Yeah. Thank you for that. We have one question left, and then we will have our musician back. And I have to let the next woman speak because she's my older sister, and she would kick my ass if I tried. So, Maggie, what do you got for us?
I would actually. So first of all, thank you. I mean, this has been so inspirational and educational, and I just, I'm really thankful for this time we've spent today, this morning. You know, this reminded me, first I'll tell a little story that I heard, and this reminded me, it's about the cows and the buffalo during a storm, and they're on this big farm, and the storm is coming, and it scares the cows, and they run away from the storm. They keep running, and you know, eventually the storm catches up, and they spend so much more time in the storm because they're running with the storm and being. Well, they run into the storm. You know, they take it head on, and they spend so much less time in the storm because they took it head on and faced it, and they ran through it. So as the storm was moving, they're running through it. So I just kind of thought, like, oh, be the buffalo.
I agree. Yeah.
So this is helpful in the fact that, you know, I also run a healing ministry, and you know, people often wonder if they can heal when the memory's blocked. And I really thought it was so insightful to take the emotion and walk it back to that memory. And I would imagine that if it is blocked, and like to spend, you know, just talk to this, you know, that's probably something that takes practice and to eventually get to the core of the trauma. And if you can maybe just speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, that actually doesn't take practice. What takes practice is the decision to immediately process. Because we're so addicted to being upset. We're so addicted to being a victim, and she did it or he did it, and there we are once again, poor me. We absolutely love that position, and it's very difficult to give up. So the first decision has to be Punja, one of my favorite authors from the last century, Sri Punja, said, first you have to decide you want to be free of pain and suffering. Without that, nothing else will work. And I can tell you from my 30 years in the therapeutic business, the truth is people don't want to let go of their pain and suffering. At a deep level, they really don't. It's very rare that somebody comes and says, I want to be complete. I want to remove all the barriers. That determination is a rare one. Most people will go from a -48 in terms of happiness to a 5 or a 6. That's wonderful. Look at the improvement. But a 5 or a 6 is still miserable. So never stop. And in terms of practice, yeah, it takes practice. I always say if you, in the beginning, do 500 processes a day. Now, that sounds like a lot of work, but if you recognize that you have 80,000 thoughts a day and they're all the same every day, you can imagine that finding 500 times to actually say, hang on a minute, that's not true, I'm not doing that anymore, is very doable. Second of all, you'll learn to develop the shortcut that I use. And that is after a while, you will have a very clear idea what feeling is connected directly to the belief. So I have a feeling, and I've done the work often, oh yeah, that comes from the belief that I can lose love. Wow, is it true? No, I can't lose love. Done. That's a 6-step process. How long does that take? 2.5 seconds. And the discipline that the course talks about, you say you want to be happy, you say you want to have joy in your life, you don't have it now because your mind is totally undisciplined. That is true. So the discipline, I was in a fortunate position that I was incredibly disciplined in sports. I also was incredibly disciplined in smoking. I smoked 3 packs a day. That takes discipline. I was also really disciplined in drinking a bottle of vodka a day. That takes discipline. So I had the discipline. Now I had to apply it to doing my work. And that means catch every upset. After a while, you'll use the shortcut. You'll say, what am I believing now? Not that again. I did that 300 times yesterday, and there it is again. Wow, thank God it's not true. Back to joy, back to love, back to peace. Don't stay in it. Often I hear people say, well, you have to be patient. So why would I be patient with feeling shitty? Who benefits from that patience other than the ego? The ego loves that. The ego says, oh, well, go gentle, stay in, take your time. Why would I? My birthright is waiting. My birthright is waiting for me to make one decision, say I'm claiming it. Why would I wait? Why would I be patient with my crap? Not doing it anymore. And that's
the story. Thank you
That's the
so
story.
much. I hope that we can have you back because obviously this conversation was rich and beneficial and putting Mia up because she definitely, not that we have winners and losers, but I'm going to give her the award for the best bonnet this contest. Ease this Easter.
And the accent is pretty good.
The accent doesn't hurt at all.
Mhm.
And thank you again for bringing our amazing musician here who's going to sing us out today. And here we have Jack.
Okay, thank you. I remember when you all came over, like Brendan, Bella, and me, and everybody else. We went to visit Corcomroe Abbey. When Mia was talking earlier, she said that she went to a sunrise service in some church somewhere. I'm not sure where that was, but they used to have it in Corcomroe Abbey every Easter when John O'Donoghue was around, and he used to say it, and the odd time he'd say his poetry. So the poem that I'm going to quote part of during the song is from that service, as it were. So now, you'll know this song, so if you want to sing it, please do. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine. let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Even when it's dark, I'm gonna let it shine, Lord. Even when it gets dark, I'm gonna let it shine. Even when it's dark, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, Lord, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. May the nourishment of the earth be yours. May the clarity of light be yours. May the fluency of the ocean be yours. So, may a slow wind wrap these words of love around you, an invisible cloak to mind your life. So may a slow wind wrap these words around you, an invisible cloak to mind your life. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, Lord. Light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Thank you.
You're muted, Mo.
I was just saying, thank you so much, Diederik. Thank you so much, Jack. Thank you so much to all of the amazing bonnet wearers. Y'all did a great job. Another spectacular year of presentations. We should wear hats every time. It just adds something to it. Hopefully we will all be able to get that book and really practice these 6 steps, because on the page they sound great, but application is everything. Oh, look it, Brenda already has it. If she wins, she gets double the prize. And thank you, Jack. That was amazing again for being our musician 2 years in a row.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I think I win, Maureen, because I actually worked with Diederik in Costa Rica. It was a while ago, and it wasn't at your place. It was at a Course in Miracles retreat, but it was transformative, absolutely life transformative. So thank you, Diederik.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I remember that. There was somewhere way, it was south and in the jungle, wasn't it?
Yes, it was
Yeah,
in the deep jungle.
Yeah, that was an amazing time. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I don't think that you could come across a more beautiful community on Easter morning. Thank you all for celebrating today. God bless. Keep shining your light. Bye.